Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I am going to do a review of Professor DM's review of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, specifically from the context of watching a man lose his true name. All right? So there's no spoilers for Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves in this content, but this is a very sad video. I really try to bring a lot of joy and keep my tone up. I struggle with that, right? Because there's a lot of things that vex me in the world, right? But this is going to be poignant. This is going to be a keen sense of sadness and sorrow in this video, because this is a horribly sad moment, and what's happening with Professor DM is really shockingly terrible, and it's a sadness. It's a true sadness. All right, let's get into it. All right, so what is Professor DM's true name? It was, in December of 2022, it was Professor Dungeon Master. And you will find hundreds of videos on his channel where he says, hi, or he says, I'm Professor Dungeon Master, right? And because he was Professor Dungeon Master, he had a burning passion and a joy and a love for Dungeons & Dragons that is now completely gone, in my humble opinion. And so his true name was Professor Dungeon Master. What do I mean by true name? This is a really important thing. It was brought forward by Gary Gygax in D&D 1E. And true name is this incredibly important concept in Dungeons & Dragons. It's saying, if you're an entity in Dungeons & Dragons and someone knows your true name, they can bind you with it. They can control you with it, right? And so a lot of entities do a lot to protect their true name, right? And true names are this thing where it's who we are. It's our true name, right? And I have a true name. My true name is John Scott Garibay, right? And why would I say my true name to anyone? Well, I'll tell you right now, I am bound to you. I am I have a duty to you, and I have a responsibility to you, and I have a commitment to you, right? And there's some vulnerability, and relationships are built on, real relationships are built on vulnerability. And I have vulnerability. If you think for 1 second, why do people fear public speaking? Because it's terrifying, because there are real ramifications for it. I have to be very careful what I say, and I have to own every word I say. I'm not some chumpty on a hide account rolling up and commenting on my stuff, right? I get that all the time. My name is Blixelclicks5, right? No, it's not. You don't own any words you say, and you're a coward, right? I'm not a coward. I own every single word I say, right? And Professor Dungeon Master owned every single word he said under Professor Dungeon Master, right? He was right there. You could see who he is. That's an identity account. That ain't a coward's hide account, right? But he had a true love for Dungeons & Dragons, right? His review of Dungeons & Dragons is so slanted and so stilted and so marinated in hate. I have never seen anything like it. It is just staggeringly sad and makes me weary, right? It's incredibly sad, right? And so there are literally hundreds, if not over 1,000, amazing reviews of Dungeons & Dragons, right? Honor Among Thieves. In addition to that, it has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. Everybody who saw this movie at the macro level loved it, right? And so what he did is he cherry-picked the worst possible reviews he could find, right? And highlights them to make sure that no one goes to see it on week 2. So there's no possibility it can come out of the commercial disaster that was box office week 1, which is 38.5 million. And the thumbnail on his video is Hasbro ruins their own film, right? Hasbro, there was a specific word he used, that Hasbro essentially shackles its own film, right? And the reality is, there absolutely was a misstep, right? There more than a misstep. There absolutely was. He was like, how Hasbro ruined their own movie, right? But the reality is, it was ruined, right, by the OSR allies, like him, like Jenny D, who came along and did everything they could to remind everybody beforehand of how bad the 2000 movie was, and to make sure that it was pressed in everyone's head that the idea of a good D&D movie was laughable, and they didn't care how many people of color that they harmed in the process, how many people of LGBTQ orientation they harmed financially, because the film failed, right? And there were a lot of people of color and a lot of LGBTQ people who had a lot at stake here financially, right? And they just didn't care. They're like, we really want to stick the virtual knife in D&D, and we do not care who gets harmed in the process. And the OSR allies were successful. They were like, every horrible, stereotype you have of D&D, we're going to reinforce it for you right now, when you not going to the film and you continuing to give videos and tell everybody, hey, D&D is the same crap you thought it was in the 80s. And it worked. The OSR allies were able to stick the virtual knife in D&D Honor Among Thieves, and they made the movie stumble. And Professor DM, who used to be Professor Dungeon Master, he's part of that, right? And I get a ton of pushback on pushing against the OSR allies, and I'm telling you, Professor Dungeon Master was a force for good 6 months ago. In the D&D community right now, I think he is the Prince of Darkness. So you have seen a man let go of his true name. He was Professor Dungeon Master. At the beginning of his review of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, he says, I am Professor DM, and that I am the professor of direct message. I am the professor of direct message. I have never seen this in my life. He took his name and tore it out of his heart. And he said, I renounce my true name and I take a false name. Right? And and so essentially he has cloaked himself in this horrible name, not a false name, a dark name, right? And what is the direct message that Professor DM is giving you today? He's saying, look upon me. I had a true name, right? Professor Dungeon Master. I was Asimar, right? And I stood for good in the D&D community. Look at me. I renounce my true name of Professor Dungeon Master, and now I am Professor Direct Message, right? And what is his direct message, right? This is his direct message, in my humble opinion. His direct message, in my humble opinion, is the following. He's saying, where there was an ember of joy for Dungeons & Dragons in December of 2022, now there's a burning ember of hatred, and I wish to see D&D blow away in ash, right? And watch this video where I cherry pick one or two reviews out of 1,000 to tell you this is a bad movie, and to give you old man hates new thing again and glorify it, right? Oh, and also, I just wanted to tell you about this movie filled with people of color and and LGBT allies and heroes, right? You know who I really like the most? The one guy who was older than me, Hugh Grant. He's the only person who had a good, it was like he was trolling. It was like he was like, oh, I'm an old man. You know who I liked in the movie? The man who was older than me. The one man who was older than me, right? It's so sad, right? And the reality is, where you saw an Asimar, there's now a fiend. And I really feel Professor DM is a force for darkness in the D&D community at this point. And there is a king of the OSR. Her name is Kelsey Dion. And there's a possibility the OSR will have a bright future. But she will have to very carefully, right, do a virtual skirmish against the Prince of Darkness of the OSR, which is Professor DM, Professor Direct Message. And the direct message, in my humble opinion, is where there was a burning ember of joy in my heart, it's been fully replaced by a burning ember of hatred for D&D, and I will do everything I can to destroy it. And I think there is a faction within the OSR that is dedicated to the destruction of Dungeons & Dragons. And this is why I will not give up highlighting where the OSR does damage and continues to try to be the parasite that can kill the host. And I'm so sad. I genuinely miss Professor Dungeon Master's epic, joyful content, and now it is just a landslide of horrific, vindictive hate toward D&D, trying to pull it down off the mountain. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.